So I'm gonna show you everything I've done so far. I'm not gonna be doing it hands-on but I'm gonna explain everything what I did. Okay, so the very first thing you want to get started, this is gonna be the base of the extractor, which is gonna be almost at the bottom, and that's where the frame's gonna rest, right? So you could use a plywood, which is what I'm using, or some sort of plastic board or something that's gonna be, you know, strong enough and impervious if you can. Now so you first mark a hole, cut a circle with a jigsaw, and I had a couple of iterations, and so ignore these little notches here because I initially made it too big. It didn't fit my barrel, so I had to redesign and scour different parts. So this is a second version of that. So but in your case, it's going to be just a circle, mark a center, draw a circle, cut it off with a jigsaw, and then drill a hole 3/8 of an inch, which is going to be the size of our shard. This is basically a 3 by 16 TPA threaded rod. You can get it on Lowe's, Home Depot, anywhere. That's going to be our shaft. And once you have your shaft, you basically can use this as your template to drill these 4 holes, which is going to be on the 90-degree spacing at the edge of this support board. And those are going to be holes for our 1/4 of an inch rod. So this rod is basically going to create a cage for an entire extractor, right? So you're gonna have rods on 4 sides, and this wheel's gonna be sitting on the bottom. Well, the other one, this one, is gonna sitting at the bottom right here. And so that brings me to the next point about the baseboard. So once you have this bottom board cut out, what you want to do is find the exact spoke where your frame's gonna be basically sitting, right? And that's where you want to mark all these hole location. So I basically use about a 1-inch hole saw. I cut these off. I had to file it and so on and so forth. But the wheels I'm using, these are about 20.5 inch diameter wheel. Got it off my daughter's bike. She's not riding it anymore. And it happened to have 9 spots where I could put frames, okay? And I basically drilled those 9 holes. Now, the shiny coating you see on right here, every part you're going to be using inside this extractor needs to be coated with this Cambric Coating painting epoxy Easter clear coating. This is a food safe coating. You can get it from any of the Honey beekeeping equipment store. I think I got it from I don't remember where I got it from, but a quart, I almost used like a 1/4 of a quart so far. And so far I painted this baseboard 3 coats. I also painted these wheels twice, 2 coats on these wheels, and I still need to paint all the other stuff. So let's go over to some other stuff. The bearing blocks, right? So we're gonna have a 1 bearing block. We're gonna kind of put it right at the bottom of this trash can. There are 4 holes we drilled out, and I made it on my milling machine and lathe. Basically I cut a pocket for a bearing. I'm using a 6202Z bearing. I got it off eBay. They were cheap, so I kind of designed the block around the bearing rather than, you know, other way around, basically buying the block. And then if you don't have the lathe, I don't know, I mean, I guess you could you can use wood block as a bearing block, but it wouldn't be as sturdy. I use the aluminum 3/8 or 5/16 thick bar at the bottom bearing block, and I use you know, something from my trash pile, the plastic for the top bearing block. So this is how it's and then I made a lot of the small parts. I'm gonna go over those. So these are just standard stainless steel 3-inch bolt. I got it off Lowe's. They're gonna be basically mounting from the bottom of the barrel or trash can in my case. I have a little thick rubber washer I cut off from some material I had laying around. Basically I'm trying to seal it so the honey doesn't leak out from the bottom, and that's what I use. And I'm gonna put basically a spacer. So they're gonna be the bottom here, a little spacer, a bolt here. Oh, I'm gonna have to cut the bolt off. Okay, and then we're gonna mount the bearing block on top. Now, how we're gonna mount the bearing? We made the sleeves, a couple of sleeves again on my lathe. They are at a 1/2-inch taper. I don't know if you can see that. This side is, for example, is narrower. Oops. Hang it. So this side is narrower than the other side. So it's a 1/2-inch taper. So the idea is we're gonna mount this on the rod between a couple of nuts. I also threaded sanded down this lock nut or jam nut. So basically I'm gonna use a couple of jam nuts, or one regular nut and then the other jam nut. See if I can do this. So we're gonna put a jam nut first. Put the sleeve, a bearing block sleeve, and another jam nut that's kind of a sanded down, so it's gonna fit through this bearing hole. So we're gonna basically mount it right like that without anything, right? So the idea is we're gonna have the bearing block at the bottom, and the cage will come down from the top, and we just slide it in, and that will mount it. We don't have to do any jiggering around at the bottom. It's gonna basically sit right and snug because of the taper I cut down, the 1/2-inch taper. So it's gonna fit nice and snug. It won't move once it starts rotating. Okay. Another few parts I had to make is this used to be a coupling nut, a 3/8 of an inch coupling nut, for example. I cut it off. I put a 30-degree taper on my lathe, and the reason I did that is when I mount this wheel, basically I'm gonna use this to kind of lock it in place. Okay. Same thing for the other wheel I had. I couldn't make a taper, the hole was too big, so I found this, I don't know, some sort of washer from somewhere in my junk pile, and it was a perfect fit. So basically this is the washer we're going to be using to lock this wheel down onto the shaft. Okay. So I mean, you can see I had to come up with some, basic blocks that I had to design, out of scratch, but it's not too bad. If you're handy enough and if you have some access to some equipments, you could make these small parts fairly easily. And the last part I had to make was this, again, a barrel nut I had was a 3/8 of an inch and a 16 TPI thread on both sides. I actually drilled it halfway through this coupling nut, and I drilled a 12 millimeter, or I think it was 12 millimeter, about 1.75 millimeter thread in here. I had to cut this thread with a tap. And the reason I did these is, let me walk over here. I bought for a driving mechanism, we're gonna be using this this dual speed paint and mortar mixer. Okay, this I got it from the Harbor Freight for about $100, 80 bucks with the. And this this guy is gonna have a coupling, which is gonna be this thread, which is, like I said, 12 millimeter by 1.75 millimeter. So that's what I had to do. So basically this coupling is gonna sit here. It's gonna thread onto my shaft on my Honey Extractor cage, and that's gonna be basically how we're gonna drive this whole thing. Okay, I still need to make the mount of this thing, but for now we're ready to assemble the cage. So we're gonna start doing that, and I'm gonna fast forward the next part of about assembling the cage, so I don't bore you guys with a lot of video footage. So let me get started assembling the extractor cage. All right.